Welcome to the AFR Saints channel, where we provide you daily content on your favorite team, the New Orleans Saints. Do us a favor and hit that subscribe button. Be sure to leave your comments below and smash that like button. Who dat? Well, when you're looking for a new coach, that pretty much headlines the offseason, that and then the hope associated with the NFL draft. That's kind of where the Saints are right now. Chris Trapasso, our buddy from CBS Sports, going up to join us now. He's got a new mock draft up that dropped yesterday. We'll talk a little bit about it. Chris, we appreciate you, man. How are you?
Doing good, man. Thanks for having me again.
Man, it's always our pleasure. We appreciate you making time. Let me start with what you have the Saints doing at 9. And it's interesting because the Saints are one of those teams that's quite honestly bad everywhere. So no matter what you do at 9, it probably is going to hit a need. But you have him going Luther Burton, the wide receiver from Missouri. Why?
Here's why. I think when healthy, the Saints receiver group has so much talent down the field. When Chris Olave is healthy, he can get open at the intermediate level. We know what Rashid Shaheed can do downfield. But Luther Burton is kind of that, I'm almost comping him to Deebo Samuel Light, where after the catch, making defenders miss, the contact balance that he plays with, he's not going to necessarily separate vertically a ton. But Derek Carr can throw him those high percentage throws that have really been only kept for Alvin Kamara of late over the last 2 years and turn those into 10, 15, 20-yard gains.
Chris, if you were listing out, and a draft is tough to do, right? Because you're sort of blending need and best available and all that sort of stuff. But if you were looking at the Saints roster and you were trying to measure need, what would you put at the top of that list?
Okay, so this is difficult. I think, and you mentioned it at the jump there, that they have a lot of needs, and they really, anywhere they go, I don't think the position-wise, they're not going to take any criticism because you could really make an argument for a lot of different positions. To me, if it's just strictly looking at needs, it's probably on the edge with Chase Young's contract voiding, Cam Jordan at the end of his career. I think outside of Carl Granderson, they need another premier pass rusher. But if you're factoring in value to a team in the modern NFL, I think wide receiver makes a huge difference, probably the biggest difference. And I get that Luther Burton doesn't really look like the classic top 10 wide receiver, but in kind of a down wide receiver class, they could maybe get the first or the second wide receiver off the board at number 9 that would really move the needle next season. Maybe even starting as that wide receiver number 3 as a rookie.
You have Abdul Carter from Penn State, the fantastic edge rusher. Mentioning edge rushers, 1 pick later to the Bears. Would Abdul Carter make sense to the Saints? Are there other players that might be on the board there at 9 that could help off the edge?
He certainly would make sense, and he's going to come into the pre-draft process with a lot of momentum because of how well he played in that semifinal game against Notre Dame with an injured shoulder. And he really made the Micah Parsons transition in college, that he was off the ball, then they moved him on the edge, and he had 60 pressures on a little over 30 pass rushing snaps in 2024, which is a crazy high pressure rate. He would certainly make sense, maybe a little bit smaller than what the Saints have really leaned toward over the last 4 or 5 years. But I really like this edge rusher class. I love James Pierce out of Tennessee. I know that you're there in SEC country. Certainly know what he did for the Volunteers on the edge. He's big, he's long, just needs to gain a little weight. But the bend, the pass rush moves, the speed to power conversion is all there. And then Nick Scourton from Texas A&M, who came over from Purdue and was that more of that Cam Jordan type body who can play inside and out and has NFL caliber power. So for as much as we're going to hear about it being a down wide receiver class and a down class in general, the edge rusher group and interior defensive line is very good.
Chris Trapasso is with a CBS Sports NFL draft writer on Twitter at Chris Trapasso. I probably should have started with what you did at the top of the draft because that's probably going to get the most attention because you do have 2 quarterbacks and you mock a trade with the Giants going up to 1 to take Cam Ward and then Jalen Milroe, number 2 to Cleveland. All right, Chris, explain.
Well, let's keep this in context. It's still relatively early, and I do a mock draft every week, so I can't just keep putting Cam Ward, Shedeur Sanders, Cam Ward. So I like to just see how the ripple effect would really impact the entire first round if it's a little bit of a surprise. We've had that before. 2014, Blake Bortles is the first quarterback off the board at 3 overall, really caught a lot of people by surprise. There's been those surprises, maybe Daniel Jones going inside the top 10, 2019. We always see a riser, certainly Joe Burrow, Baker Mayfield, Kyler Murray were not really on the radar, even Zach Wilson in 2021. I think with Jalen Milroe, right now, there's essentially zero buzz. And I think the way that Anthony Richardson's second season played out in Indianapolis probably hurts Milroe because he was that freaky athlete that was raw as a passer, and that's kind of what you're getting with Milroe. But I think at the combine and during this pre-draft process, Milroe has a very good opportunity to separate himself with his arm strength and his athleticism away from Cam Ward and Shedeur Sanders. And if there's any teams that are afraid of, the circus and all the entitlement that might come with Shedeur Sanders, I think they could talk themselves into kind of Jalen Hurts 2.0 with Jalen Milroe. I mean, certainly Jalen Hurts was not a ready product once he joined the Eagles in 2020, and he's been in the Super Bowl now, and he's part of an integral team that's in the playoffs every year in the NFC. So that's just wanted to look to see how the first round would shake out if Jalen Milroe does erupt at the combine and starts to generate that buzz that can be really important during the pre-draft process.
For what it's worth, in the draft, Chris has Shedeur going 6 to the Raiders. Is there a scenario where, look, the Saints in their entire franchise history have used a first-round pick on a quarterback one time. It was Archie Manning in 1972. So crazy. I don't think it's going to happen. But is there a scenario where you could see the Saints at 9 taking a quarterback, or a quarterback maybe sliding where they could be in play to move up to take a quarterback?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. I think it's one that you have to consider. I don't think this quarterback class is anywhere close to what we've had recently. There's not the premier talent at the top. But like I mentioned earlier, I think wide receiver moves the needle more than even a really good edge rusher today. And if Shedeur Sanders is there, if teams don't really believe that Cam Ward has that elite level physical nature to his game, and he's sitting there at 6, 7, 8, or even gets all the way to 9, I think you have to consider it if you're the Saints. You know what you have with Derek Carr. For short stretches, he looked like a upper tier quarterback. If things weren't great around him, and his offensive line wasn't protecting well, he didn't really play that great of football, and he is getting up there in age. So I wouldn't put that at the top of the list thinking that this is what the Saints would do. But your question is interesting because I think just because of the positional value and how cheap you can get that young quarterback relative to the veterans at the position, they would have to consider it if one of those three get close to them at number 9.
Chris, you mentioned Jalen Hurts a couple times, obviously a day 2 guy. When you look at your board at quarterback, who do you think are the guys that would be the value options on day 2 of the draft at quarterback?
Kyle McCord from Syracuse is interesting. He led the ACC in passing yards. He had that terrible game on prime time against Pitt. He threw 5 picks in that game, and that kind of totally doused any momentum that he had in terms of a draft prospect. But he only threw 12 interceptions the entire season, like 30-plus touchdowns. Not much of a mover inside the pocket, but in terms of anticipation, the arm talent, he was a big recruit that, of course, started at Ohio State and then went to Syracuse. Not many people were expecting a lot, and he was outstanding. So Kyle McCord is one. Second, third round, I don't think would be totally crazy. And then Jackson Dart is the other one from Ole Miss that big recruit, starts at USC, transfers to Ole Miss, starts immediately. The system that Lane Kiffin operated was like bubble screen or a go ball. So there might be some time for Jackson Dart to acclimate to reading an entire field, understanding layers, triangle reads, things like that. But the talent is there. He's got a strong arm. He's pretty mobile. He could be one that in a few years we're like, man, he was a 3rd or 4th round pick, but he's actually playing almost as well as some of these first round quarterbacks.
Chris Trapasso is with us, CBS Sports. Get his latest mock draft up there. He's on Twitter at Chris Trapasso. Before you go, you got one LSU Tiger in round one. It's Will Campbell. And, man, you got him high. You got him at number 3 overall to Tennessee. Why? Obviously, the first tackle off the board. Why do you have Campbell as your first tackle off the board?
I mean, this one is going to be I think consensus. You can have 50 other draft analysts on, and they're all going to say Will Campbell is the best blocker in this class. Just 3 straight years of steady play. Looked like a first-rounder when he was a freshman. Never regressed from that. He looks under control. The balance that he plays with in pass protection, he's nasty as a run blocker. He just needs to get a little stronger, which is the case for 99% of any offensive lineman coming into the league, especially younger ones. The one other LSU player that I don't have in this mock that I might have because I just finished my grade on him, Braden Swinson was tremendous on film. I know he's a little bit older, was a transfer from Oregon, but the bend, the tenacity, hustle, the pass rush moves, the length, I think the pre-draft process, his measurables are going to make a big difference. But on film, he looks like a first-round caliber player to me. And usually in the back portion of the draft, those teams don't need quarterbacks. They usually have pretty solid wide receiver groups. Those edge rushers can be that final piece of the puzzle for those teams picking, from 25 to 32. Braden Swinson is the other one that I think could ultimately go in round 1 from LSU.
Very interesting. Hope springs eternal every year around the draft, man. It's such an exciting time.
Mm-hmm.
Chris Trapasso, always good stuff, man. Thank you so much for the time.
Thanks. Appreciate it.
Hey, thanks so much for watching. Please leave your comments. I love to interact. And be sure to hit the red subscribe button below.